It all began with a garden gnome, a harmless little figure named Bartholomew that I had placed beside my front steps. He was a housewarming gift from my sister when I moved into Oak Ridge Estate 6 months ago. I never imagined that tiny gnome would kick off the most ridiculous neighborhood drama I've ever experienced. I was watering my lawn one afternoon when I met her, Karen Wilkins, the president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. She came marching up my driveway, clutching a clipboard to her chest like it was a badge of honor. Her expression could sour milk, and her sharply angled blonde bob practically screamed, HOA enforcer. "Excuse me," she said, voice coated in fake politeness. "I'm Karen Wilkins, president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. Are you aware that your lawn ornament is in violation of Bylaw 7.3 regarding unapproved decorative elements?" I turned off the hose and offered her my hand. "Nice to meet you, Karen. I'm Daniel. I didn't realize there was an issue. It's just a small garden gnome." She didn't shake my hand. Instead, she shoved a thick binder into it. "Here's a copy of the HOA rules. Page 42, paragraph 7. All lawn ornaments must be pre-approved by the decorative committee." That gnome wasn't approved. The binder was color-coded and packed with sticky tabs. "All right," I said, flipping through it. "I'll take a look. Thanks for letting me know." "You have 48 hours to remove the unauthorized decoration, or you'll receive a $50 fine," she replied, already turning away. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates." I watched her power walk down the street and shook my head. It felt like overkill for a 6-inch gnome, but I wasn't trying to make waves. That evening, I read through the HOA manual and, to my disbelief, discovered she was technically right. Lawn decorations required a full application process, photos, dimensions, materials, all subject to a 30-day review. For a gnome, the next morning, I emailed in the application and moved Bartholomew to the backyard in the meantime. Problem solved, I thought. I couldn't have been more wrong. 3 days later, I found a notice slipped under my door. This time, the issue was my grass. It was a 1/4 inch above the maximum allowed height of 2.5 inches. I pulled out a ruler, and, sure enough, a few spots were slightly over. I mowed that same afternoon, a little irritated, but still trying to play by the rules. Then came another violation. My garbage bins had been left in view from the street for over 12 hours after pickup. The week after that, my new welcome mat didn't fall within the approved earth tone palette. Each notice came with increasing fines, and each one personally delivered by Karen, wearing the same self-satisfied look like she was handing out golden tickets. It became obvious I was being targeted. When I mentioned it to my neighbor Jim, he gave me a knowing look. "Oh, yeah, she does this to every new resident," he said with a sympathetic sigh. "She'll nitpick your property until you either move or join her little circle of HOA loyalists. Last year, she made the Thompson family repaint their house because the beige was too yellow. That's when I decided to play her game. I started following the rules to the letter. I measure my grass twice a week. I power wash my driveway every Sunday. I made sure my garbage bins were out of sight within an hour of pickup. I even double-checked the approved colors before replacing a doormat. And for a little while, it worked. The violation notices stopped. But Karen, she didn't stop. She started driving by my house slowly, eyes scanning every inch of my property like she was just waiting for me to slip up again. A week later, the decision on Bartholomew, the gnome, finally came through. My application was denied. The reason? According to the decorative committee, whimsical decorations detract from the dignified aesthetic of Oak Ridge Estates. So, Bartholomew stayed banished to the backyard, safely out of sight from the ever-watchful HOA. That should have been the end of it. But the real trouble began when I decided to repaint my front door. I had carefully chosen Midnight Navy, a shade pulled directly from the HOA's own approved list. I spent the better part of a Saturday painting, making sure it was neat, clean, and by the book. The next morning, I opened my door, to find Karen already waiting, violation notice in hand. She looked almost pleased. "This is not the approved color," she said with that same smug tone she always used. I held up the paint can. The label was clear, Midnight navy, exactly what was listed on page 67 of the HOA's guidelines. Karen squinted at the door, then shook her head. This is clearly ocean depth blue, which is not on the list. You'll need to repaint or face a $200 fine. They're literally the same color. I said, my patience starting to wear thin. I followed the rules. Well, the committee will decide, she said with a smirk. I've already called for an emergency meeting tomorrow evening. Consider this your official violation notice. That was it. The moment I decided I wasn't a rollover anymore, I documented everything. Photos of the door beside the HOA-approved color chart, a sample of the paint, store receipts, and even screenshots of the website where I ordered it. I also started talking to my neighbors, and what I heard only fueled me further. Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years with her petty, selective enforcement. If you didn't kiss the ring, you became her next target. At the emergency meeting, I laid out my case calmly and clearly. Several neighbors, including a few who had been similarly harassed, spoke up on my behalf. Karen's face slowly turned a deep shade of crimson as she realized she was losing control. When the vote came in, 4-1 in my favor, with Karen as a lone dissenter, she stood up without a word and stormed out of the room. But she wasn't done. The next morning, I walked outside to find my front door scratched, deep gouges, likely from a key. Thankfully, I had just installed a motion-activated security camera. The footage was crystal clear. 2 a.m., Karen herself, crouching near my door, key in hand, deliberately scraping the paint. I filed a police report immediately, but I chose not to press charges. Yet, instead, I sent Karen a firm but civil email. I have the footage. Let's resolve this quietly. Her response? Anything but quiet. A series of texts followed. First passive-aggressive, then openly threatening. You think you're clever? People who cross me regret it. Accidents happen to troublemakers. And finally, it'd be a shame if that pretty new door of yours went up in flames. Paint burns fast. Sometimes houses do too. That was the line. I contacted the police again, sent over the text and video. This time, they took it very seriously. When officers confronted Karen, she tried to backpedal, claimed she was just warning me about fire hazards. A friendly neighborly tip, she said. But that didn't hold up once they found a container of lighter fluid in the trunk of her car. Karen Wilkins was arrested for criminal threats and attempted arson, as she was led to the squad car in handcuffs. The entire neighborhood seemed to gather. People stood in their driveways, silently watching. Her face was a perfect mix of shock, rage, and pure humiliation. Later, one of the officers told me they'd searched her home and found a file, a literal binder full of notes, detailed logs on every neighbor who had ever opposed her, plans for revenge, everything from petty vandalism to serious property damage. And suddenly, I understood just how far Karen had been willing to go. Karen's bail was set at $25,000, and a restraining order was issued requiring her to stay at least 500 feet away from me and my property. The very next day, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. This time, the vote was unanimous. Karen Wilkins was officially removed as HOA president. No speeches, no ceremony, just a quiet, overdue end to her reign. But the fallout didn't stop there. Her employer, a local real estate firm known for its focus on community values, placed her on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of neighborhood standards, now facing charges that could land her behind bars. At her next court appearance, Karen entered the courtroom with her attorney. She still wore makeup and a blazer, but the carefully curated image had started to unravel. Her once perfect posture was replaced with slouched shoulders. Her hair, usually immaculate, hung slightly off-center. And the confidence? Gone. When the judge announced she would be facing felony charges, including criminal threats and attempted arson, offenses carrying up to 3 years in prison, I watched the blood drain from her face. Her attorney immediately requested a brief recess. When they returned, Karen was no longer the woman who had once barked orders around the neighborhood like a drill sergeant. She looked pale, rattled, like someone who'd just woken up to the consequences of a life spent pushing people too far. How does the defendant plead? The judge asked. Karen's voice was barely audible. Guilty, Your Honor. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the defense table. And just like that, the once feared president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, the woman who ruled with binder full of bylaws and a flair for intimidation, stood before the court, finally held accountable. No regulation clause or emergency meeting could shield her from reality now. Justice, it turned out, didn't come in a 3-ring binder.